Okay, non-random mating. Non-random mating is that in living organism, they may have a preference to a certain trait, so they would increase the mating of individual with certain trait. So random mating is never observed in natural population because we have something called a sexual selection that we talked about previously. Living organisms usually prefer, or they would choose the partner that contain some special trait that will help them to survive. An example of non-random mating or this kind of sexual selection is the inbreeding. An example of inbreeding, you can find it in the royal family. They like to marry with other royal family to preserve their royal blood, and that causes an issue because it increases the frequency of the recessive abnormality in human being, meaning that the recessive allele cannot be covered up by the dominant allele, because when they choose only a limited number of individuals in a very small population, the royal families, then most of the people in the royal family, they only have this similar gene pool, so that it will be abnormal. It will be very easy for the recessive allele to be expressed instead of being covered up by the dominant allele. So because of this, they realize this issue, then they start to marry with other royal family from other countries. This is what happened in the past. For a while, they realized that if they only marry within their own royal family, it is very easy to have this abnormality occur. Then they start to have a marriage between different royal family in the world, but then they still realize that it doesn't work this way. Then they now, as you know, that all the royal family, they marry people, so-called the peasants or non-royal people. That solves the issues. Natural selection. Okay, and finally we go to natural selection. Natural selection is the driving force of evolution. This is something that we talk about in the class. It's the mechanism or driving force of the evolution. So for animal, for organism that have advantage or have a trait that favors them to survive, then they will have the advantage to produce more offspring. For individuals that does not have the trait that allow them to survive, they will basically die off, and then they will not. They cannot produce more offspring. We talked about Charles Darwin to explain evolution through natural selection. Remember the differences between Charles Darwin's idea of evolution or natural selection versus Lamarck's idea of the evolution. And so evolution by natural selection requires 4 events. So we will talk about each 4. So natural selection requires individual variation, inheritance, overproduction, and differential reproductive success. Oops, that's about it. For individual variation, natural selection is all about surviving to get the trait that is favorable for surviving the environment. So you cannot have the entire population of the same trait. If the entire population have the same identical trait, that means there's no individual variation, then natural selection will not occur. And inbreeding basically will discourage to have individual variation. Inbreeding encourage to have this same trait for everyone. That's why inbreeding is not good for evolution. Inheritance, meaning that the trait, the individual variation, the trait, it has to be able to pass down to the next generation. So the trait can be inheritable. Otherwise, if the trait is not inheritable, then it cannot pass down to the next generation. For example, what are the traits that cannot be passed down? For example, if someone get the limb amputated, that is a trait, but losing a limb, it is not something that it can be passed down to the next generation. Overproduction. The inherited trait has to be overproduced, meaning that for next generation, a lot of the offspring should have this trait. Otherwise, if only a few of the offspring has this trait, then eventually this trait will be lost in the population. That's why it has to be overproduced, meaning that majority of the offspring should have the same trait inherited. Differential reproductive success, what it means is that for the offspring that has this trait that favor survival, these offspring will live and reproduce. But for individuals that do not have this trait, then what happens is that these individuals, they will reproduce less, or they may even die off, just like what Charles Darwin proposed. So this is what we call differential reproductive success, meaning that offspring who acquire this trait, they can survive and they can reproduce. And for offspring that do not have this trait, then they will reproduce less, or they may even cannot survive. So this is what we call differential reproductive success. And that is the end of this week's online lecture.